All right. Awesome turnout. Thank you everyone for joining. And good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you're coming from. And thank you for attending today's GrandStream Certified Specialist in Networking Solutions certification course. My name is Hugh Nguyen, and I'm a technical support engineer for GrandStream. And before we get started, I know what you're all thinking, so I would like to address what's on everyone's minds now. And the secret to my youthful appearance and flawless complexion is proper dieting and proper hydration. So now that we have addressed the elephant in the room, we can move forth with this training with a peace of mind and a sound heart. Okay, so I'll start the presentation. All right, once again, you are here because you have signed up for the GrandStream Certified Specialist in Networking Solutions certification course. I know it's a mouthful, but that's the title of this course. If you did not sign up for this course, you clicked on the wrong link. I'm not sure how that's possible, but it is. All right, so before we get started in the actual material, let me go over a brief overview of the GrandStream Academy. And basically, from our experiences in running previous training courses, we found that oftentimes we had a mixture of students with varying experiences with GrandStream devices. Sometimes we have people that come for the training that has never dealt with GrandStream devices, and sometimes we have people that are experts and have deployed GrandStream solutions for years. And because we have that mixture of different experiences, it was very difficult for us to conduct the training at a deliberate pace. And one of the solutions that we came up with is to launch the GrandStream Academy. We've actually broken down the training into 3 different levels aimed at different experience levels. The first level that you are attending today is the GrandStream Certified Specialist course. This was designed to teach you about the products, the GrandStream Certified Professional certification was designed to show you how to use our products, how to configure them, and how to deploy them. And the GrandStream Certified Expert certification will help you demonstrate your expertise in our products. It has a lot to do with troubleshooting. And so to summarize, the GrandStream Certified Specialist will give you the product knowledge. The GrandStream Certified Professional level will give you the ability to deploy our products, and the GrandStream Certified Expert gives you product expertise. Okay. Currently, we have only the GrandStream Certified Specialist courses available. The GrandStream Certified Professional courses will be available soon, so please feel free to contact your local distributor for the upcoming schedule. One last difference between these different courses is that the GrandStream Certified Specialist course does not require in-person training because there is not a hands-on aspect to the course, whereas the other 2 levels has a heavy focus on hands-on configuration of our devices. Hence, they do require the in-person training. Okay, so here's our agenda for today. Today's certification course primarily focuses on our access points as well as our routing solutions. Currently, the GWN series includes only access points and 1 gigabit VPN router. So we'll introduce you to the GWN series. We'll go over some common deployment scenarios and briefly touch on the installation and deployment of these products. And then we'll cover the main application features of the access points, followed by the router. Hang on. So for those of you who are joining via web browser, you can resize your window. You can make me smaller or bigger, and you can make the presentation bigger or smaller, but you should be able to control that. There's a slider there. Let me know if you still can't see it. But you should be able to see probably a picture, the video of me on the left and the slides on the right. You can slide that left and right to resize the window. All right, where was I? Oh yeah. At the end of the instruction portion of this exam, there will be a certification exam. The certification exam is a 30-minute exam. You have 30 minutes to complete the exam. However, you have up to 2 hours after the instruction course to start the exam. Once you start it, you'll have 30 minutes. If you have any questions, please feel free to type them into the IP Video Talk chat window, and I'll try to answer them as we move along. Okay, moving forward. So this is where the meat and potatoes begin. What are the GWN series? Now, one word of advance warning. I typically don't have any words on my slides when I do presentations, but this is more of a training webinar, so there will be a lot of content on these slides, which we'll cover. Okay, so what are the GWN series? Basically, we have access points as well as routers. We have indoor access points and outdoor access points, primarily modeled to fit into a more enterprise environment, also serving the small to medium-sized business. They are different than some of what you would traditionally think of access points because they do have a wide range coverage, and we'll go over the specifications. And yes, David, you will get a copy of the slides. Actually, I will enable them on the Grandstream Academy. Once you log in later, you'll be able to download the slides. Okay. Our gigabit VPN router, the GWN 7000, was designed for the small to medium-sized enterprise. And we designed it with very high performance routing and switching. And we also have a built-in hardware accelerated VPN. And the best thing, or the most outstanding feature of the GWN series, is that they have an integrated controller embedded right into the web interface so that you do not have to install a separate hardware or even software controller to manage your devices. Everything can be managed directly on the web interface of any one of our devices. Okay. So starting off, we have the first access point that we released, which is the GWN 7610. The GWN 7610 is an 802.11 AC Wave 1 access point. Being that it's a Wave 1, it supports up to 250 concurrent clients. It has a throughput of 1.75 gigabit per second, and it has 2 gigabit ports. You can power the GWN 7610 via PoE, PoE Plus, or a PSU. The antenna configuration is a 3x3, and being that it is a Wave 1 device, this is a single user MIMO. Johnny asked a question, can the GWN 7610 manage the other models? Absolutely. All of our access points can manage each other, regardless of the model. Okay. The GWN 760 also offers dual band, 2.4 and 5 gigahertz, and the embedded controller on the 7610 can manage up to 50 other GWNs, regardless of model. The next access point that we have available is the GWN 7600. This is a more recent release for us, and it is an 802.11 AC Wave 2 access point. Being that it's Wave 2, it does have increased capacity for concurrent clients, and the 7600 can support up to 450 concurrent clients. It has a maximum throughput of 1.27 gigabits per second with 2 gigabit ports. It has a slightly reduced coverage range of 165 meters. That's meters spelled American way, not Australian way, compared to the 175 meters of the previous device that you saw. It has a 2x2 antenna configuration, but because it's Wave 2, it does support multi-user MIMO, the latest and greatest MIMO. Okay. Again, it does also have dual band Wi-Fi, and it can manage up to 30 other GWN access points with its embedded controller. That was for you, Ben, by the way, the Aussie Dig. Okay. And our latest release is our first outdoor long-range access point, the GWN7600LR. Again, this is an 802.11 AC Wave 2 device. Has all of the great features of the GWN7600, except for the fact that it has an outdoor weatherproof casing, as well as an increased coverage range of 300 meters. And the 7600 and the 7600LR both support beamforming technology, which we'll cover more later. Okay. And so here's a quick comparison chart of all three access points. The difference between the 7610 and the other two models is that the 7610 is only AC Wave 1, the other two are Wave 2. Both the 7610 and the 7600 has a 3 dBi gain on the internal antennas, whereas the 7600LR has a 4 dBi gain. And the coverage range in metrics, one for America and one for the rest of the world. It's 575 feet or 175 meters for the 7610, and 541 feet or 165 meters for the 7600, and 984 feet or 300 meters for the LR model. And for channel bandwidth, right now, they all support 20 megahertz and 40 megahertz on the 2.4 gigahertz radio. And on the 5 gigahertz, we also support the 80 megahertz channel. Will we add the 160 megahertz channel? Probably soon, once we get it working. That'll be nice to have. Okay. And if you look down to the second to the last row, you'll see the maximum transmit power for the radios on each of the devices. The GWN7610 has a maximum of 26 dBm. The 7600 is 22, and 7600LR is 22 for countries that regulate via FCC, and 20 dBms for CE. Now, of course, also depending on what country you are, the transmit power will also vary. When you first log into the device, you'll have to select what country you can use this access point in, and the power will adjust based on the government regulations of that country. Okay. Now, every single one of these access points has 2 gigabit ports. They also have a PSU port, except for the 7600LR. The long-range model does not have a PSU port, and you can only power it via PoE or PoE+. Okay. And if you look at the last column, you'll see that the 7610 and the 7600LR has a self-power adaptation based on if it detects PoE or PoE+. So if it detects PoE+, it can alter its power, and if it uses PoE, it'll try to use a power saving algorithm, but still able to perform at full performance. Okay. And a lot of people ask the question, why did Grandstream start Wi-Fi? I mean, that's kind of a departure from what we normally do. And I mean, there's a whole 30-minute presentation I can do on that. But one of the features that we put into our devices by default to work with our SIP devices is the QoS. Our access point has built-in default QoS rules meant for SIP and VoIP traffic. And all of our access point also supports WMM or Wi-Fi multimedia for QoS, along with VLAN and TOS as well. And the networking protocols we'll cover in subsequent slides. One last thing that you need to know on this slide is that each of our access points, you can create up to 16 SSIDs per access point. Okay. And now on to our wired networking products. The one that we have available now is the GWN 7000. We label it as an enterprise multi-WAN gigabit VPN router. Basically, it has 7 gigabit ports. 2 of them are WAN ports and 5 are LAN. One of the LAN ports, we call it a net port. You can also configure that as a third WAN if required. It has built-in hardware accelerated VPN controller that supports PPTP, L2TP, IPsec, and OpenVPN. The GWN 7000 also has an embedded controller, and it can manage up to 300 other access points. The multi-WAN ports on the GWN 7000 can act as load balancing and or failover. So it can be either one or both. The routing capacity on the GWN 7000 is 1 million packets per second, and it has a 10 gigabit switching backplane. Jose asked if the GWN 7000 is it plastic built. It does have some plastic components. Of course, the internals such as the heatsink are not. The cover on the outside that you see there on top is a gloss plastic build. But it's actually a pretty hefty device for its size if you get a chance to handle one. Sebastian Bouchard asked what type of QoS is applied to the access point, primarily for voice over IP traffic, as well as what Kevin Scott mentioned, video traffic, H.263, H.260+, and H.264. We'll soon revise those default QoS rules to also support H.265 as well. Okay. And the GWN 7000 has a built-in firewall that we'll cover later with many great features such as SPI and DPI. And we also have 2 USB 3.0 ports on the back of the GWN 7000 that you can use for such things as external hard drives and create a NAS, etc., etc. Right. So here are some common yep, you're right, Daniel. The 7600LR does have 26 dBm max transmit rate for FCC. What did the slide say? Did it say 22? Yeah, the slide did say 22. It's supposed to be 26. Good thing is that's not one of the exam questions. You're safe. User 063 asked, how do you compare this to Draytech brand routers? Well, what we'll do is I can send you a comparison chart offline. Just shoot me an email because I don't really know who 063 is. But shoot me an email, and I'll get that comparison chart over to you. Okay. So moving forward, some common deployment scenarios for our networking solutions. Obviously, the small or home offices is a great deployment scenario. You can use the GWN 7000 as your main router and firewall, and add in one or a few access points as your wireless connectivity. This is a very simple setup. I use this at my home. Actually, I use the long-range one because I don't mind getting cancer. But this is a very common scenario. The next one would be, your commercial location, your retail locations, such as your coffee shops or bookstores, if those still exist. Any type of commercial location would be good. You can make use of the built-in captive portal features, for example, to provide free internet to your patrons, or or use it. One of the features that we're adding is Wi-Fi marketing as well, where you can display ads as part of the captive portal. Johnny asked, any dynamic routing support on the GWN 7000? That is actually a feature that we will be releasing in 5 days. Hang on, let me turn on these automatic lights. We will be releasing support for dynamic routing protocols in about 5 days in our next firmware release. Hopefully we're on schedule, but it includes BGP, OSPF, and I don't know. It's going to support RIP as well. I'm not sure if many people are still using RIP, but it'll have that as well. Murray asks, GWN 7000 LAN ports, are they PoE? They do not have PoE output, but you can actually power the GWN 7000 via PoE or PoE Plus with the LAN port. Link aggregation currently is not working, but will be working in the future. That's a question for. Okay. Next deployment scenario that is popular with our network solutions are the large and multi-floor buildings. Think of an office building that has multiple floors, or even hotels, for example. Great deployment scenario where you can have one or multiple access points in each floor and extend that network using the same SSID on every single floor. Prashant asked, the ranges that we have disclosed on the GWN, do they actually go that far? Absolutely, Prashant. Actually, the ranges go beyond those numbers, but those are just a safe number that we put on our data sheets. For example, the 7600LR, we put 300 meters. We've actually tested up to 500 meters, but it all depends on the environment, what type of attenuation is involved, what other interference is around. So it really depends, but we've actually tested much farther than what we have stated. Okay, the next deployment scenario is the multiple office locations. Similar to what Grandstream has, we have an office here, and let me fix these lights real quick. All right. Don't worry, I can edit that part out of the video later. Grandstream, for example, we have a Los Angeles office where I'm located now. We also have an office in Dallas, Texas, as well as Boston and Chicago and all over the world. And we use our GWN 7000 to create VPN tunnels between each location and share the different resources that are required. And we use the access points all over our building for access. And because we share the same authentication database, wherever location that I travel to, I can use the same credentials to log into the wireless network. Anant asked, can we use the GWN 7610 as a point-to-point outdoor AP to connect to offices? I would recommend you use the 7600LR instead, because that has a weatherproof casing, and you can basically, it's sort of call it point-to-point, but use one of them as a wireless bridge to bridge over to your wired network. Okay. All right, so let's move on to the installation and deployment. Now, I mentioned earlier that this portion of the instruction will be very, very brief because really the GCS was not intended to show you how to configure and deploy these devices. That's more on the GCP level certification. Okay, so let's take a look at the physical interfaces of the 7610 and the 7600. You'll see that, well, maybe you can't, but it's very tiny. This is the back of the access point. There's a power LED as well as a net/PoE port and a net port. Now the net/PoE port, this is the one that supports PoE and PoE+. You can use this to power up the access point via PoE or PoE+. The net port, you can, something wrong with the lights here. Maybe someone in the office is messing with me. With the net port, you can use that to connect directly to the router if you don't have PoE, or you can daisy chain another 7600 access point or another 76XX access point. We also have a USB port on these two access points for future features that we'll be adding later, such as IoT integration, as well as location-based applications. And then lastly, we have a hard reset button that you can use to reset the device to factory settings. David asked, will the GWN 7600 provide radius services in the future? Now, our access points support authentication via radius, via an external radius server. It is in the roadmap to have localized users in the future, but we're still working on the capacity on how many users can be created on the device itself. But as of now, it supports external radius server authentication. Okay. Jose Ronaldo asks, what's the maximum power consumption when 5 gigahertz is enabled? I don't know that answer right now, but I can find out for you and I'll send you an email. Probably not gigawatts, but yeah, maybe near there. Okay. All right, so let's take a look at the back of the GWN 7600LR. This one is a little bit different than the rest because it does not have the power port. So there's no PSU port for the back of this device. Everything else is the same. Okay. Jose Ronaldo asks, is the captive portal supported? Yes, it is, and we'll cover that a little bit later. Prashant asked, is it omnidirectional or a Yagi? It's an omnidirectional device for all of our access points. Yeah, I'm going to need to ask someone to come in here to jump around so the lights don't turn off. All right, so there are a couple of ways that you can log into the access point to configure. One of them is using the discovery method using the MAC address. And now if you have your laptop or computer on the same network as the GWN access point, you can simply open up your browser, type in https://GWN _ the MAC address of your access point .local. It'll automatically try to discover that, and you should be able to log into the same into the web interface if you're on the same network. The second way to find the MAC, the IP address of your access point, is to use the GWN Discovery tool. This is a tool that you can download for free on our website. You run this on your Windows machine, and it will try to detect the IP address of all the access points on your local network. It has to be on the same broadcast domain. Okay. And from there, you'll be able to log into the web interface by clicking the Manage Device link in the app once you discover your access point. And of course, the way that most of us IT professionals use is to log into your DHCP server and look for the IP address that was assigned to your access point. Okay. Renault asked, does a discovery tool work over a VPN? That depends on how you configure your VPN. If you allow broadcast traffic to traverse the VPN tunnel, then it probably will work, but most VPN tunnels do not allow that type of broadcast traffic. Great, so I have someone here jumping around so the lights don't turn off. I'm not sure if you can do that for 2 hours, but thank you. Gambaracha asked, is it possible to configure without the discovery tool? Absolutely. As I mentioned, all you have to do really is to figure out what the IP address of the access point is and throw that into your browser, and you'll be able to log in. Now, a couple of caveats. One, by default, all access points are set as slave access points. Once you log into the web interface, it automatically becomes master, an AP master, and in order for you to change that back to slave, you would have to factory reset the device. So, if you are sure that the access point you're logging into, if you're sure that you want that to be the master access point, go ahead and log in. If not, don't log in. Otherwise, you'll have to factory reset it. And so, with that being said, we have several different ways to use the access points. The first one is the standalone architecture, right? So as you can see on the diagram here, you have the infamous internet cloud on the left. You have a router in between and a PoE switch used to power the access point. Now, in this standalone mode, the access point is simply acting as a wireless access point for your wireless devices to be connected to the wired network. And from here, you can create different network groups, different SSIDs, and basically a very, very simple architecture. Right? And in this architecture, it's out of the box set for this architecture. Basically, it's not managing other access points at this time. You just plug it in, and you have actually a Wi-Fi network already by default. If you look on the back of the label of the access point, you will see of course, the Grandstream label there, the FCC label. On the bottom left-hand corner, there is a Wi-Fi password. That's the default Wi-Fi password for the default wireless network that's listed on the middle, on the bottom there. You see it says SSID. And basically, the format of the default SSID are the letters GWN followed by the last 6 digits of the MAC address. And whenever you factory reset your access point, it'll default back to this SSID and default password. Okay. All right, here is the second architecture that you can use with the access point. This is a master-slave architecture. You can see in the diagram, you have the internet on the left, the router in the middle, a master access point on top, followed by 4 slave access points on the bottom. In this architecture, you're using one GWN master to manage, control, configure, and deploy the other GWN slaves. So in terms of configuration, all you do is log into the web interface of the GWN master on top, and from there you'll be able to discover and configure the rest of the access points on the network. Johnny asked, can the GWN have 2 master as management controller? The answer to that is it can have only 1 master, but we also have a failover master. Okay, so in that same architecture, when I mentioned that you can log into the master access point and discover the slave access points, if you look on the picture on your left, this is the web interface of the access point discovery screen. It shows you currently, if you can see that, I hope you can see that, it shows you on that one line itself as the master, and on the right are all of the discovered access points on the network. It gives information such as MAC address, model name, IP address, and what firmware they're on. You simply click on that link button next to each access point to pair it as a slave to your master. Jose asked, will some configuration propagate on all network APs if I configure on the slave AP? Actually, you will not be able to configure any settings directly on the slave. You would have to use the master to configure the slave. And through the master, you can configure for multiple access points at the same time, and then you can have it propagate throughout the network. Okay. Moving on to the GWN 7000 router, let's take a look at some of the physical interfaces. On the left side of the router, you have the 2 USB ports, USB 3.0. Again, as of now, you can connect peripheral devices such as printers or external hard drives to create a network printer or your NAS, an easy way to correct a network storage. Okay. Immediately to the right of the USB ports are your 2 WAN ports, and right after that, right in the middle, is the net port. Now the net port, you can configure that as a WAN port, a LAN port, or even a VoIP port for certain service providers that have dedicated Ethernet drops just for the voice over IP connection. Okay. And following after that, you have 4 more LAN ports, a hard reset button, and a power plug. Right. And again, to configure the GWN 7000, you simply log into the web interface. Now, by default, you can only access the web interface through the LAN side of the GWN 7000, and the default LAN IP address is going to be 192.168.1.1. So that's the IP address that you would use to input into your web browser to access the web interface. Now, if you wanted to access the web interface or what we call the management interface through the WAN side, you would have to enable that in the settings. But by default, we have it turned off, of course, for security purposes. All right. And so again, let's briefly return back to the embedded controller feature. We'll get into a little bit more details on the embedded controller. All right. So as mentioned before, all of our access points and the routers can act as a controller for all GWN Wi-Fi access points. Right? The main features include auto discovery of all access points on the same broadcast domain. You can pair devices, you can provision them, you can manage certain Wi-Fi network settings, you can manage groups and SSIDs. You can also manage the clients. You can oversee and manage all of the clients on the network, regardless of network group, and also can act as a master failover. Right, so that's a pretty complicated diagram on the right. Not really, it's pretty simple. Okay. So one, to discover other access points on the network, and again, I want to emphasize on the same broadcast domain. Simply go to the Access Points submenu in the web interface and click on the Discover Devices button. And from there, the GWN will send out broadcast messages to try and discover other GWN access points on the same broadcast domain. From there, to pair it, you just simply click the pair link next to each access point that you want to pair, and it will automatically start to provision that access point. From there, you can go to some of the network group settings and add membership devices to network groups to have them take on certain settings that you wish, which will be covered in the GCP. More detail in the GCP. Okay. So for you networking gurus out there, this is a review. This is just some of the technical terms that we use on our access points and in our network solutions in general. One is network group. This is a very long explanation of a network group, but the only thing you need to know is that a network group can have one or more SSIDs. For those SS, I lost my network. Can you guys still see the presentation? Okay, we're back. Sorry. Accidentally kicked the network switch here. It's good now. All right. For those of you who don't know what an SSID is, just think of it as the actual, well, there's probably a more technical explanation than what I'm giving, but just think of it as the network name that you see when you scan for a wireless network on your laptop or your phone. It's not exactly that, but just think of it as that. Yeah. All right. And so within a network group, we mentioned that it can have multiple SSIDs per network group. This is just an example of how you can segment and organize your networks. You see here on the left, you can create network groups and SSIDs, the guest network, office, lab, training, etc., and then assign access points per network group or per SSID. You can actually use either or. And if you assign them to a network group, they will automatically take on all of the SSIDs that are related to that network group. Okay. And with the embedded controller, you can manage the connected clients on regardless of the network groups, as long as they're part of this management domain, all from just the master controller. And from here, you can see certain information about the connected host, such as the MAC address, the host name, if it's a wired or wireless connection, what channel they're using, how much throughput they're getting, and how much total data that they're using. Kevin asked, can you limit the bandwidth to the group and even provide time periods, etc., that is active outside, that is stopped? Yes, you can, and we'll cover that a little bit later. We'll get into more details on the Wi-Fi scheduler that we have built in. Okay. All right, another feature of the embedded controller is the master failover. You can assign a failover master to take over in the event that the primary master access point failed. This can help with creating redundant management networks. If you didn't have a failover master and your primary master failed, all of the access points, the wireless network, etc., it'll still work, but you will not be able to make any configuration changes until you either upload the hopefully a saved configuration of the primary master onto a new master, or you have set up a failover master architecture where the failover master AP can take over. Okay, and it's actually very, very easy to set a failover master. The GCP will cover the actual steps, but you just go to the access points page, press the failover button, and select from one of the available access points and hit save and apply, and now you have a failover master. All right. So now we'll move on to the GWN application features. Before we continue, let me see where we are on time. Not bad, about 52 minutes. I know we have scheduled 2 hours for this webinar. Typically, I don't really have a problem with time because I speak fast anyways, but I'll try to speed it up. We have quite a few more slides. Application features of the GWN include monitoring, reporting, band steering, client isolation, client bridge, Wi-Fi scheduler, LED scheduler, bandwidth management, roaming, captive portal, security, maintenance, troubleshooting. These are the features that we'll cover in the next few slides. Okay. For monitoring and reporting, we have a few different ways that you can monitor and view the status of your network. One is the default status page when you log in. Excuse me. Through the overview page, you will have a nice view of your entire wireless network. You'll be able to monitor access points and the connected clients. You'll be able to monitor the different channels that your access points are used and the clients that are connecting with. You'll be able to see your top access points in terms of data usage, and again, the top SSIDs used in terms of data usage, and the top clients based on data usage as well, and an alert notification section for any alerts, system alerts that are going on. From the status page for actual clients, you'll be able to see more details on the connected clients. You'll be able to see such things as the MAC address, the product model, the firmware version, the IP address, the uptime, the load average, the link speed, the wireless channels being used, depending on what channel that you have, that it has auto selected if you didn't specify a specific channel, and the wireless power, transmit power on the current access point. As part of the monitoring and reporting suite of features, the GWN series has an email notification feature that will allow you to have the access point send emails based on a few things that you have selected to be monitored. For example, if the memory usage or CPU usage is high, you can send an email alert for that. You can send an email notification if somebody tries to upgrade the firmware, if someone tries to add or remove a network group, add an additional SSID, change the time zone, if someone has changed the admin password, and if the AP goes offline, or if one of the slave AP goes offline, the master will be able to send an alert email notifying you of those items. Okay. The next feature that's available on our access point on the 7.6, actually on all of our access points, is the band steering. For those of you who are not familiar with band steering, it's basically a feature that allows the access point to negotiate with the wireless client based on their capabilities and send them over to the less crowded 5 gigahertz band. For example, the way it works is if a client joins the network, the access point basically asks, well, it doesn't really ask, it's just part of the negotiation process, but just for the sake of understanding, the client asks, the AP will ask the client, do you have the capability of running 5 gigahertz? If it says no, it throws them on the 2.4 gigahertz band. If they say yes, then it'll throw them on the 5 gigahertz band. Okay, so that's basically band steering in a nutshell. The next one is client isolation. For those of you who are familiar with this, it's available on every other wireless access point out there. There are 3 modes for client isolation that we support. One is the internet mode, the other is the gateway MAC mode, and the last is the radio mode. With the internet mode, wireless clients will only be able to access the internet through the access point. They will not be able to access the management interface on either the router or the access points. So they'll just be able to access the internet. In radio mode, wireless clients will be able to access the internet and the management interfaces, but they will not be able to communicate with each other. So wireless clients within the same network, wireless network, will not be able to communicate with each other. And lastly, we have the MAC, the gateway MAC mode, which the wireless client will only be able to connect to the management interface of the access points. They will not be able to communicate between other wireless clients, and they will not be able to access the internet. Basically, you can think of this as a management mode. Okay. Yep. Next slide. Another feature is the client bridge mode. With the client bridge mode, it allows an access point to act as a bridge between a wireless network and a wired network. Through this mode, you'll be able to connect clients such as you connect your Wi-Fi clients, such as your router, your laptops, your iPhones, or iPads, and of course your Android devices. I'm not trying to be picky here, but you'll be able to bridge those clients through to another network via the wireless bridge and connect it to the wired network. I'm not explaining that correctly. Think of it this way. Here in where I'm sitting now in this room with a beautiful background view, I'm connected via wireless to the local network here. But I have my warehouse in the back. A lot of their devices cannot connect via wireless because it's warehouse equipment, everything is wired, and I don't have the capability of running wires from here all the way back there. So what I'll do is I'll install another access point in the warehouse and connect that to a wired network bridge closer to their equipment, and then create a Wi-Fi bridge from the access point here in this room out to my warehouse so that I can link that wired network to this wireless network. I hope that's a better explanation for you guys. But that's the feature that we have on our access points. All right. And this here is a feature that will address, who asked this question? Kevin earlier. We have a Wi-Fi scheduler. With the Wi-Fi scheduler, you'll be able to configure a schedule to turn on or off any Wi-Fi SSID based on SSIDs. You'll be able to customize the schedule based on hours, minutes, days, and a weekly schedule. And you'll be able to choose which network group and access point to apply the schedule to. So one of the advantages to using a Wi-Fi scheduler, for example, in our Malaysia office, after hours, we're pretty sure that none of us or no one's going to be using the wireless network during the after hours. So we'll shut off the SSID broadcast. This actually achieves two things. One is it saves radio and energy resources as listed, but it also acts as extra security because we're not exposed during those times. And here's a screenshot of the Wi-Fi scheduler screen. You'll be able to fine-tune the settings down to the minute per day or through a weekly schedule. Very easy to configure. On the GCP certification course, we'll get into more details on how to configure these settings. Okay. We also have an LED scheduler feature. This will allow you to set a schedule to turn on or off the LEDs on your access points. This was a requested feature by many. Not only does it help reduce energy, but if you have a lot of access points in one location, you can avoid making your space look like Christmas every day and turn off all the lights. Here's a screenshot of the LED scheduler screen. Very similar to the Wi-Fi scheduler. Okay. And here's another slide that answers the other question of Kevin, is the bandwidth management. The bandwidth management on our access points and also our router allows you to limit the bandwidth for wired and wireless users, both the upstream and the downstream. You'll be able to limit the bandwidth based on SSID, based on MAC address, or based on IP address. So you'll be able to fine-tune exactly how you want to limit that bandwidth. Okay, and it's very, we have created it so that the web interface is very easy to manage this bandwidth. If there are any Cisco guys out there, you know that doing bandwidth management on the CLI takes at least 4 lines of commands. With ours, you just simply log into the web interface, go to the network group, click add or edit the Wi-Fi, and from there you can manage the upstream or downstream based in megabits per second. And on a per client basis, you go down to the bandwidth rules menu, submenu, where you can specify the MAC or IP address and the upstream or downstream. All right. David asks, is fast roaming supported between multiple APs? That's a great question because that happens to be the next slide as well. Our access points, or actually our GWN series,
supports roaming, actual roaming protocols, or fast roaming as some people call it. We support several different protocols, actually 4 different protocols, and one other method that's not an actual protocol. The first one is minimum RSSI. Through this technique, you can basically control how a device goes from one access point to the other. You basically set a minimum RSSI, basically a minimum signal strength, or I think RSSI stands for Received Signal Strength Indicator. You can set a minimum RSSI so that if a client goes below that threshold, the access point will automatically kick them off of that Wi-Fi network. And then, of course, whenever a Wi-Fi client reconnects, it usually tries to reconnect to the network with the strongest signal. So in this diagram you see here, you have 2 access points installed in range so that there's a portion of their signal that intersects. In that part that intersects, that's probably where you want to configure that one access so that the clients can move from one cell to the other. So this is just a, it's not a real protocol of sorts. It's just one of the techniques that people have used in the past to easily roam from cell to cell. But there are actual protocols that allow you to do that much more effectively. Okay, the first one is called PMC caching. This is actually the protocol that's enabled by default on our access points. Basically, if you are using 802.1x authentication, if you're going from one access point to the other, you do not need to re-authenticate. So it does cut down the roaming time. It cuts down the lost packet amount by quite a bit. We'll have a comparison chart a little bit later. But the IEEE did actually come out with 3 official roaming protocols. They are called, in our suite, we call it the Enterprise, Voice Enterprise suite of protocols, that allow K and V. And since they are officially ratified by the IEEE, they do have a much shorter scan time, basically by eliminating the 4-way handshake when you're roaming from one cell to the other. And if you can see the comparison on the bottom there, there's the roaming type and the RTP loss packet. Normal roaming, this is basically when you're using a method like minimum RSSI to roam from one cell to the other, you're losing on average about 33 to 53 RTP packets if you were on a voice call. With PMC caching, you're losing about 9 to 14 packets when you're roaming from one cell to the other. And with the 802.11 RK and V, you're only losing 1 to 3 RTP packets. And 1 to 3 RTP packets, it's unnoticeable to the human ear, so you won't even notice that you moved from one cell to the other. Okay. So all of our access points support the IEEE ratified roaming protocols for Wi-Fi. Jill asked, is the captive portal customizable? Yes, and we'll go over the captive portal next. You guys are just one step ahead of me the whole way. We're also going to be, actually we have already uploaded the sample captive portal HTML package on our website, so you can just download that and modify that to your heart's desire if you wish as well. Okay. Our access points, as well as the GWN 7000 router, has the built-in captive portal feature. And For those of you who are not familiar with Captive Portal, I'm sure you've been to like a Starbucks or a coffee shop or a hotel or a bookstore, and you've tried to access the free Wi-Fi that they provide. When you connect to their Wi-Fi network, you're usually presented with a splash page where you have to agree to their terms and conditions, or in the case of a hotel, enter your room number and your last name or some form of authentication. That's basically the Captive Portal. You know, it's used in many different environments. You know, all those places that I mentioned. Notice that I've mentioned Starbucks and coffee shops as separate identities. Yeah, that's for another day. In many different ways, but we have that feature built directly into our access points. I know some of the other brands have them separately. It's a software that you install on your PC or your server, but we have a pretty robust Captive Portal directly in our access points, configurable directly through the web UI. David asked, do you have antenna pattern graphs? Yes, I can send that over to you. If it's not on our website already, I'll send that over to you. Okay. All right, now back to our Captive Portal. You know, you can choose several different authentication methods. Of course, you can choose not to have any authentication and just have them click on the terms and conditions page typically, or you can have them locate. One is using an external radius authentication server, and from here, when they access your Captive Portal page, typically you either ask them to enter a username and or password, and from there the access points or the GWN 7000 will contact the radius server excuse me, for authentication, and upon successful authentication, access to the internet would be granted. Another feature that we just recently added on our GWN 7600, 7600LR, and GWN 7000 is Facebook. We're going to add that into the 7610 fairly soon. But with Facebook authentication, they connect to your Captive Portal. They then have to log in with their Facebook account, and once they log in, they'll be granted access to the internet. David asks, how suited to wall mounting is a GWN gear? The GWN 7600LR is wall mountable. It's typically designed for outdoor mounting, but on an indoor mount, you can mount it against a wall and it'll not be a problem. As you can see here, these are the 7610 and 7600. These are typically designed to be ceiling mounted, but because they are omnidirectional, it's not a problem if you mount it against the wall as well. All right. So let's take a quick look at how to set up the Captive Portal. It's actually very simple. You connect to your controller's web interface, go to the Captive Portal settings, and create a new Captive Portal, select the authentication type, and then from there you assign the Captive Portal to your network groups. So it's very, very simple. You can actually customize that, as you can see here. If you go down to the Captive Portal file section, you will see the different HTML and images and CSS that's being used for the Captive Portal. You can modify those or upload your own, and you'll be able to customize your Captive Portal to whatever your requirements are. Okay. And through the Captive Portal, you'll also be able to supervise which clients are connected, and from there you'll be able to manage and monitor what's going on with Captive Portal as well. Johnny asked, can the GWN forward the captive to an external captive portal? Currently, the 7600, GWN 7000, and GWN 7600 LR can redirect to an external captive portal. The 7610 cannot do that yet, but we're going to upgrade that firmware to allow that feature very, very soon. Okay. And so in our GCP course, we cover all of these steps on how to configure and customize the captive portal, and also how to use an external captive portal as well. So stay tuned for that course. All right, the GWN series of networking solutions for Grandstream was actually built with security in mind. We have quite a few security features that are exclusive only to Grandstream devices. Right? The first one is that each GWN device has a unique security certificate. Typically, with other vendors, every single model all share a security certificate so that they can be reused. But for our GWN access points and routers, they all share a unique X.509 certificate. Basically, it contains a MAC address as DCN. And what can you do with this? Well, you can use it to securely provision, pair, or control devices. And that way, you won't be able to spoof Grandstream devices because every security certificate is different. Okay. And if a hacker were to be able to compromise one of Grandstream's access points, it doesn't mean that the rest of the GWN access points would be compromised. So it's just only one. So it's definitely safer, and because it uses the security certificate, it's a lot safer than password authentication as well. Okay. All right. Next is firmware protection built right in. For those of you who are familiar with with networking, open source networking, open source packages, DDWRT, OpenWRT, etc., you'll notice that there's a whole community out there that is dead set on modifying different vendors' firmware to do more than what it can. And that's great. I definitely, Grandstream supports open source. But what we've built into our access point as well as our router is a firmware protection so that any tampering of firmware files will fail because there's a digital signature verification. So it'd be very tough for hackers to be able to install modified firmware on our devices. So that's another set of protection that we have available. And of course, we have the secure boot and runtime protection. This, of course, prevents the firmware from being tampered with, but it also prevents failed firmware upgrades. Because every time the system boots up, it checks the firmware images, makes sure that the firmware files are good. It will not try to load that firmware unless it passes a digital signature. It also prevents RF parameters from being modified, and the main kernel modules are protected with digital signatures as well. And so less likely to have bricked devices during firmware upgrades. And of course, we have the latest FCC regulations to protect the RF parameters, because every country has different RF parameters based on government policies. and because we have these protections, end users will not be able to modify them. And so, we don't have to worry about any violations and fines from different regulatory agencies. Okay, and in terms of security, we support all of the popular Wi-Fi encryption techniques today. You're all familiar with WPA, WPA2, WEP, et cetera. And we have listed here, for those who are not familiar, you guys all know about this, but we have listed in order the security strength of each encryption type. Obviously, we have WPA2 plus AES 256 as the strongest. It's greater than regular WPA plus AES, greater than WPA plus TKIP, and greater than WEP, and obviously no authentication. So these days, WEP and WPA are not secure, and we do not recommend you use them unless you have to, because those have been easily cracked. In fact, WPA2 has been cracked too, but they were using a supercomputer and it took quite a while. So WPA2 with AES is still the recommended option, and it's supported by pretty much every client device today. So in that order, those are the strength of security for each encryption type. And just as an FYI, the differences between WPA2 Personal and WPA2 Enterprise, because we often get the question, well, do you support 802.1x authentication? And yes, we do, but it's listed as WPA2 Enterprise because WPA2 Enterprise uses a Radius server for authentication rather than just a password for authentication, as in WPA2 Personal. Okay. Right. Other than basically ease of management and a large number of users when using Radius, everyone can have their own set of credentials. 802.1x is considered more secure. WPA2 PSK uses the same key for encryption, whereas 802.1x uses a different key for every station. Okay. Again, we have unique passwords for every access point by default. We mentioned earlier that the SSID format, default SSID format, is GWN followed by the last 6 digits of the MAC address. But each Wi-Fi password also is a random string that is generated in the factory. So, and every time, as soon as you log into one of our devices, you'll be forced to change the default web UI password, which is, not very complicated. The default password for the web UI is admin. The default Wi-Fi password is different. It's different for every access point. So it's important that you distinguish the difference between the two. Alexander asked if we will release the GPL related files for the GWN series. I think it's on our website already, but I'll double check with you. If you don't mind, shoot me an email as a reminder, and I'll get that over to you. Okay. And we know, with our experiences on voice over IP endpoints, that maintenance and troubleshooting is very important. However, with Wi-Fi and networking equipment, it's a little bit different. You can't just simply capture a trace or look at some syslogs. So it's a little bit tougher. So we try to build in some tools there to help you troubleshoot. And the GCE certification that hopefully you guys will enroll in later, will go through a lot of the troubleshooting procedures. But here are some of the available tools for maintenance and troubleshooting. Obviously, one is for upgrade and provisioning. We can do a local provisioning or upgrade where you can upload the files directly in the web interface or configure it directly in the web interface, or you can do it remotely by inputting the server path and have a provisioning file or the firmware files on a remote server. It can be done via HTTP, TFTP, and HTTPS. And you can also schedule the upgrade or provisioning automatically based on a time schedule. Renault asks, can we upload a 7610 config to a 7600 or vice versa? No, you cannot because they're quite different. Being that the 7610 is a Wave 1 device and the 7600 is a Wave 2. There's quite a few differences in configuration, so you'll only be able to upload the config of one model to the same model. Okay. As part of the upgrade and provisioning suite, all of the config files can be encrypted using AES-256, and the firmware, all of the firmware is encrypted with a proprietary algorithm from Grandstream so that you will not be able to upload any tampered firmware. Okay. Johnny asked how to upgrade the firmware on a slave device because he remembers that I said you cannot configure the slave directly. Good question, Johnny. Through the web interface of the master AP or the master device, you can actually upgrade all of the slave devices at once, or you can schedule each to be upgraded sequentially. Now, of course, you'll probably want to do the upgrade in phases or sequentially, because if you upgrade them all at the same time, you'll probably lose your wireless connection, because if they all upgrade and they all reboot, you're going to lose some access. So phases or sequentially, but you can control all of that on the master AP or the master controller. Sorry. Okay. Also, built into the access point and the router are the syslog and packet capture tools. The GWN actually can save its syslog locally, or you can send it to a remote server. You can also view the syslog in real time on the web UI, and you can use the web UI to get packet captures as well. You can select which interface or network group to capture, and you can filter the traffic that you want to capture by IP, port, or protocol. And then from there, you can download the files from the web UI and examine them on your computer. As mentioned, the GWN can act as a centralized syslog server, so you can actually now, it's not just a 7610, I need to update that slide, but it's all of the GWNs now. You can have all of the GWNs act as a centralized syslog server, so you can send syslog from other devices such as your IP phones, your ATAs, or even other computers, send that directly over to your GWN devices. And it will store that traffic from different clients, and you can view that through the web UI and download it as well. Yeah. And another simple networking troubleshooting tool that we have is, of course, the ping and the trace route. From there, you can use your controller or your router to ping other devices, and you can trace route to see the path that it takes to get to another device on the network. And it supports both IPv4 and IPv6 for traceroute. So you use those tools to troubleshoot your network. And lastly, we have the core files. Now the core files, whenever the system crashes, the GWN series will store its core files in its file system. And the core files, now they're not decodable by just the normal human eye. We'll have to get this over to our developers to decode and make sense of anything. So in the event that the system does crash, you can log back into the web UI once you reboot the device, download the core files and send it over to us, and we'll figure out what's going on. Okay, so those are just some of the maintenance and troubleshooting tools that we have on our access points. Now we're going to move on over to the application features on the GWN 7000 router, because the router does have quite a few additional features that are not available on the access point. Okay. Here are a list of some of these features, and I know we're running short on time, so we'll cover them as thoroughly as we can. Okay. Again, with the monitoring and reporting, has the same type of network overview as the access point. You'll be able to, actually the interface almost looks exactly the same. Gives you a good bird's eye view of your network. Okay. This is the same as the access point. We'll skip that just because of time. Email notifications, same as access point. However, now we have on the GWN 7000 the failover and load balancing feature. We'll talk first about failover. Basically, with the two WAN ports, you can deploy it in such a scenario such as this, where you can connect two different network links. In this picture, it's two different service providers, one to WAN 1, the other to WAN 2, and you can set it as failover, where if the primary connection that you specify fails, it'll automatically switch over to the second connection, and this is to maintain availability as well as redundancy. And the way that it works is that it uses a form of ping to ping between the different internet connections. Sebastian asked, what is the time between failover connections? I believe it's 1 to 3 milliseconds. I'll probably need to verify that, but the last time I checked, it was 1 to 3 milliseconds. But you can actually configure that as well. So you can configure a threshold to say, oh, if this WAN connection fails, the detection of this WAN connection fails for at least 5 seconds, go ahead and switch over to the second connection. Okay. Next, we have load balancing, and in this mode, you have Jill. Yeah, it's configurable, so it depends on what your corporate threshold requirements are. I know some require longer thresholds for failover. So. All right, so for load balancing in this mode, basically you have both links as active. In this diagram, you have two different ISPs, and basically you can specify the percentages of load balancing between the two connections. That way, you have basic, not really, but I guess you would call it a virtual bandwidth aggregation. Okay, so that way you will always have two connections and possibly make it seem like you have increased bandwidth. All right. Of course, moving on to the 21st century, IPv6 was supposed to be widely deployed last year, June, I believe, but it still hasn't happened yet. But we have support for IPv6. We have different tunneling methods supported. We have the traditional 6-in-4 tunnel, Basically, it's a mechanism designed to transition enterprises from IPv4 over to IPv6. And we have a lot of ton of brokers out there available, such as Hurricane Electric or 6XS. So you can use any of their free accounts in the 6 in 4 tunnels. Now, another tunneling method that we have support for is the IPv6 Rapid Deployment Tunnel. And really, 6RD is a mechanism, like it says here, a mechanism to facilitate IPv6 rapid deployment across IPv4 infrastructures. And because it was derived from the 6 in 4 tunnel, but it exists entirely on the internal network, so that you avoid a lot of the issues with the 6 in 4 tunnels. Okay, and we also support automatic IPv6 connectivity client utility, the AICCU. This is actually a free piece of software available under the BSD license. I'm not sure if they have a Windows version, but in Linux, I think in Debian it's installed by default. But yeah, it's just a utility to help you easily create IPv6 tunnels. We have this package directly built into the GWN 7000. Okay, so Jose, so yeah, that's why I said it's not really bandwidth aggregation. I say it's a virtual bandwidth aggregation because you're not really increasing the bandwidth, but because if you load balance half of the traffic to one ISP and half of the traffic to the other ISP, it kind of seems like you have double the bandwidth, but not really. Okay. In terms of a VoIP session being dropped, probably will be dropped on the failover because a lot of SIP servers look at the origin IP address. And if it's not the same, it'll probably think it's part of a different session and it'll drop. Okay. All right, another feature on the GWN 7000 is port mirroring. And this is just for the Cisco guys, it's called SPAN. Basically, it allows you to configure one or multiple LAN ports to basically act as a hub. You'll be able to send network traffic that were destined for another LAN port through the LAN port of your specification, basically a copy of that traffic. And this is great for those of you in the VoIP world for capturing traffic, because you'll be able to see exactly what's going on in your network. So that's available directly on the GWN 7000 router. Okay, and of course we have static routes built right in. Everybody knows what the static route is for, but it gives you fine-tuned control of where traffic goes on your network. Okay. Again, we're going to go back and talk about quality of service. By default, as mentioned, we have default QoS settings primarily for voice over IP and video over IP traffic that'll prioritize that traffic over data traffic. All right. And so with the GWN 7000 router, you'll be able to define upstream and downstream QoS, and there are different QoS classes that you can define as well. Okay. For the upstream QoS, on the WAN side, you'll be able to classify traffic by IP or by port or by source group. Source group meaning the categorized group that you have created within the GWN 7000, such as all of your LAN traffic, for example, all of traffic from a specific VLAN, etc. Okay, and you can apply a specific priority to each class and assign bandwidth to each classes as well. And you can specify, of course, the WAN port that it goes out of. And all of the filter options are added together. Johnny asked, can you set the priority level for QoS? Yeah, of course. You have 1 bit per level, so that's 8 from 0 to 7. So you get 8 different options. Okay. You can also set the downstream QoS as well from the ISP, and you can use that to control the incoming traffic. You can set the priority, the receive rate, and the DCSP as well, or DSCP. With the upstream, it can be filtered by IP port and or destination group, and you can add policies per WAN port. Right. We also have what we called the Smart QoS. Basically, when you turn on Smart QoS, the traffic is the QoS is dynamically adjusted based on traffic, and based on a per packet per flow network scheduling, it'll adjust the QoS on how much bandwidth is being used, and basically it keeps latency sensitive traffic at acceptable levels, such as voice over IP, so that if you're on a voice over IP call and there's a lot of data going on at the same time, that type of traffic is given priority so that you can have a better experience with real-time data. We also support DDNS on the GWN7000, and for those of you who are not familiar with DDNS, oftentimes with service providers, they charge you to use a static IP address, meaning an IP address that does not change. And so they assign you dynamic IP addresses that changes based on a set time period that your service provider configures. So for example, at my home, I'm using a dynamic IP with my service provider. It changes every 4 days. The IP address will change. And so when you have services inside of your network that you are trying to provide, let's say if you're running a web server or you have an IPPBX behind your router, that change of IP address will cause havoc. A lot of people, once they're registered now, 4 days later, they'll have to go in and change the IP address of their SIP server in order to have it stay registered. So with DDNS, it basically allows your network to use domain names instead of IP addresses, and there's a dynamic DNS client built into the GWN7000 that will update your IP address to the DNS service providers from around the world, such as dynamicdns.org, NoIP, FreeDNS, etc. Right now, Grandstream does not have its own DDNS service. May or may not be available in the future, but you can use any of the free DDNS providers available out there. And the GWN7000 has built-in DPI, Deep Packet Inspection. Basically, it allows packet contents to be inspected, and based on the packet contents and the policies that you configure, you can monitor and control that traffic and bandwidth based on the policies that you have set or the enterprise has set. And the good thing about DPI is that it displays all of the information in human readable form rather than just IP addresses and port numbers. Everything you'll be able to see. All right, on to VPNs. With the GWN7000, it can act as a VPN client or a VPN server. As of today, it supports OpenVPN and PPTP VPN server. So it can be an OpenVPN server, or it can be a PPTP server. Now, as a client, the GWN 7000 can act as an OpenVPN client, a PPTP client, or an L2TP/IPsec client. Right? We'll update the firmware so that soon you'll be able to create IPsec VPN servers as well. But as of today, only OpenVPN and PPTP is supported as a server. And with the server function, you can create site-to-site VPNs, such as here in Los Angeles. We create a site-to-site VPN tunnel from here to Boston so that we'll be able to access the resources in our Boston office, just like as if it were here in Los Angeles. David Dunn asks if we have a timeline for the IPsec server function. Now, I'll double check, but last time I checked, it's supposed to be on this next firmware release on November 27th, but I'll confirm that with you offline. If you don't mind, send me an email to remind me, and I'll get that answered for you. The GWN 7000 has many different built-in firewall features. One is, this is misspelled here, it's not called SyncFlood, it's called SynFlood. Just a very popular form of DOS attack that for some reason is still being used today in the world, probably from script kiddies that download scripts that they don't know how to use. But we have the SynFlood denial of service attack prevention built right in. Basically drops all invalid packets. You can also configure the firewall. Basically, it's an IPsec based, IP tables based firewall, so the rules are similar. Kevin Scott asked, seeing as VoIP QoS is turned on the GWN 7000, does that mean the VoIP roadmap will introduce more Wi-Fi handset solutions? Kevin, I believe you are in Australia. You should really think about attending the Australia Roadshow event that we have on, I believe, November 28th. You can contact Alloy for details. You'll be surprised to see some of the new models that we'll introduce. Yeah, that's all I can say for now. But you'll be happy. All right. As with any router, obviously port forwarding and DMZ are basic functions that are available on network devices. And lastly, on the forwarding side, you're able to control the intergroup traffic forwarding on the router. You'll be able to specify which path the traffic goes. You can easily direct traffic from one network group to the other, even though they're on different VLANs, and even specify specific VPNs to forward specific traffic over, rather than create long static IP routes. We'll skip UPnP and we'll go over to bandwidth management. As mentioned earlier, on the access points, the GWN 7000 also has bandwidth management, and you'll be able to control bandwidth again via MAC address, IP address, or per SSID. David asks, does the GWN 7000 package up OpenVPN clients with certs, etc.? Yes, when you configure your OpenVPN server feature on the GWN 7000, you can create, there's a certificate manager built right into the GWN 7000 web interface. So you'll be able to package up those OpenVPN config files and send them over along with certs if need be, and just have your clients use that to connect. The captive portal on the GWN 7000 router is similar to the access points. It supports all of the features on the access points, but one thing is that the Facebook authentication is not yet available on the GWN 7000. It'll be available very, very soon. It's just a simple firmware upgrade. Also, when I mentioned earlier about having local users, a local user database, obviously because the nature of the device, you'll be able to create or have a larger user database on the routers than on the access points itself. All right, and maintenance and troubleshooting section, I'm just going to skip right on over because it's the exact same thing as the GWN 7000 or the GWN access points. You have the same set of maintenance and troubleshooting tools as the access points. So I'll skip right through that. Oh, that was the last slide. So now I'm back on time. I thought I was late, but now I'm back on time. All right. So we pretty much covered all of the features and specifications on the access points as well as the router. Again, the Grandstream Certified Specialist certification was really designed so that holders of the certificate can demonstrate product knowledge to go over to cover configuration, deployment, and troubleshooting. That material will be covered in higher levels certifications such as the GCP and the GCE certs. So now we move on over to the test. Oh, sorry, one last question from Johnny. Does a GWN support SNMP? Yes, it does. Version 2 and version 3. Kevin Scott wants to see the slides so they can use it for the test. I don't think I can get that ready in time, but I cover most of the test questions on the exam. David, the video will be available after the training session. You will be emailed a link to download the video. But if you paid attention in the last hour, you should pass the test, no problem. Everyone will also be able to download the PowerPoint slides through Grandstream Academy. I'll also email that to everyone as well. Okay, but I'm first going to turn on these lights. All right. Second, if you look on your screen, these are the instructions for the certification exam. The exam will be accessible in exactly 7 minutes and will be accessible for 2 hours after that. As soon as you log into your exam, enter the PIN code and click Start, you have 30 minutes to complete the exam. Again, the GCS exam is a very basic certification, and it covers primarily the specification and features of our access points and routers. So you guys should do very well, but in any case, good luck. This is how you access the exam. In fact, you have received during the training another email with a direct link to the exam. So feel free to start the exam at your leisure, but it'll be available in 6 minutes. Good luck, everyone, and thank you for joining today. Everyone has my email address. Feel free to email me with additional questions if you need. James asked, do you have to pay for the other exams? Typically, we don't charge for the training. However, there is a huge emphasis on the hands-on portion, and we'll work with our partners to arrange that. But typically, and not always, but typically, we offer a very heavily discounted bundle deal on the equipment used for the training. But yeah, it varies. But we typically don't charge for the training itself. And yes, Bruce, I will try to get dancing girls next time.